in and see how everyone's doing. We've had three conversations so far. So last week we kicked off with Jamie Wheel, then we had Nora Bateson, Daniel Pinchbeck on Thursday, and yeah, I mean, for me personally, it's been very vibrant and very kind of perplexing as well, in the sense that this question, where do we go next, is quite a big one, which I knew when we started this, obviously. But I found myself really churning over a lot this week, and my sense was, perhaps if you've been on one or two or three of the calls, it might be a similar experience for a few of us. And in a few weeks, I want to do a session with just myself and whoever wants to come, to just do a bit of collective sense making around what's showing up, because there's a lot of conversations, a lot of content. But in the spirit of that, I thought it'd be nice just to do a quick check-in. Maybe just like a show of hands, who's been to at least one of the conversations so far? Nice, a whole bunch of people. Great. And who's been to all of them? Okay, a bunch of people as well. Okay, so maybe someone who's been to all of them, do you, if you feel like sharing, just, what's been coming up for you? What's on your mind? Anything new, interesting that you've been noticing? Anything kind of a bit of a tangle? It'd be great to just hear a couple people before we start. I also didn't say how to raise your hand, which is something I should have said. But just go ahead and unmute yourself if you feel like sharing. Kalima, I saw you raise your hand. There you go.
I'll jump in. I just see things moving so quickly. I'm so grateful for one thing for all of these discussions because I feel that they're bringing the leading edge into our own consciousness awareness and helping us to see that there are a lot more of us out there than we think in our small worlds, and that we're all considering the same urgency. And that's the word that comes to my mind immediately. It's urgency. Of course, there's emerge in emergency, right? So that's kind of where my mind goes with it, is that there's something emerging. And that's where I see you and Trish's work is really catalyzing something unique in this discussion, because the emergence factor is huge in that we can't we can't go back to the past and figure out what to do with this situation. It's happening globally. I was just reading an article about the UK and this. It's like we're all the politicians and the power collaborators are on the same page, and we the people are scrambling around in these big seas and these big waves, saying what to do. Well, obviously the first thing to do is find islands of sustainability and safety with one another and begin to share perspectives on possibilities. But I don't think that it's going to come from our rational mind as much as it is from a whole brain. Our rational mind has gotten us into this mess. We need a really big vision of what to do. So that's enough for me. But I really applaud your efforts in this direction, and thank you for, I'm sure, many of us.
Thank you, Kalima. That was so eloquently expressed. I think you've done a better job than I could have done in this moment to kind of wrap things up. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. And as always, I love your background and the nature in there. It always makes me happy every time I see it. Yeah, anyone else want to share anything that's been coming up for you? Kimberly, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things I was struck by was how I felt after hearing some of these and where I am now in my world and life. So I went through Helene and got heavily impacted by it, some deaths, and it was really hard, and it was also really beautiful. And the way we came together, the way everyone, you know, just naturally fell into roles and leadership. And I had no idea that you could live through such a devastation and come out the other side, even in a better place. So hearing about all that's happening, I don't feel freaked out by it. I don't feel anxious or anything like that, because I've been through something that is so difficult, and we pulled together as humans, and taking care of each other. And I live in a neighborhood that is very diverse, especially politically, socially, and social economically. So to see us all come together. So a lot of the things that we've been talking about in these different sessions has all pointed to, I'm really happy where I am. And I recently converted to Christianity. I go to the same church that Jordan Hall goes to. It's in my,
Oh,
it's in my neighborhood. I can walk to church. And that community is, and my background is actually Buddhism. And that community is unlike anything I've ever experienced. And they're very open to the fact that I'm Buddhist. They're not freaked out by it. So it's, to me, I'm seeing it happening on the ground. And it was happening before Helene, but that really kind of accelerated it.
nice, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I mean that the sense of it's so complex, isn't it? Like the pain and the suffering, and then the solidarity and the connection through that. I mean, that's a beautiful thing to share. Thank you. So we're going to begin. Everyone on Instagram Live, hello. We're just trying to get this to work. I'm just trying to invite the wonderful Trish Blain to this. Trish, for some reason, it is not showing up, um, which is unfortunate. Um, it might be your Instagram settings in some way.
Well, I'm not sure. I am on it right now, so I can double check settings.
Yeah.
So hello, everybody. And I'm a little aware that we were tangling with the technology piece. And if I said an expletive before I realized people were coming in the room, my apologies for that. So there was a little bit of just playing with it. And the technology's been kind of kicking my butt today. So let's see here. Is there any settings I should in particular be looking at as far as?
I'm not sure. We might have to cut our losses. I don't know why
All
it's
right, we
not
can just go.
finding you.
Let's
Yeah, we'll have to do it next time,
Trish
unfortunately.
underscore Blaine is the
Yeah,
nope,
for
you're
some
not
reason
finding
just not
that.
showing up, even though we follow
All
each
right.
other. Anyway, we
Or
we were
here's the live link. Can I go through that? I wonder.
possibly. Let's see. Or you could invite me, perhaps. You could start live and invite me.
Let me see if I.
Don't worry, guys. It gets much better than this in a couple of minutes. We have a really good
All right.
plan.
Know what it is? I think it's not that I'm not set up to. This is what live activities. Okay.
Yeah,
Microphone, camera. All right. I'm turning things on.
Okay.
This is
All right.
good.
Okay, we'll try one more time, and everyone put
Okay.
like a prayer to the technology
Yes.
gods. Okay, and then we'll try this. So, okay, great. Yeah.
It's not seeming to play
Unfortunately, not
nice, huh?
working. So no. So I
All
think
right.
we'll leave
Let's
it, and
just.
we'll
That's to
reset.
be. That'll be a future excitement of you and I
It'll be a
going
future
on
excitement. We'll figure it out. So, well, Trish,
Thank
let's
you.
do a little.
Yeah.
Let's all do a little stretch to just reset. So we just
Yes.
drop in together. It's just us, which is beautiful. Actually, I really need that stretch. Very nice. So, okay.
Yeah.
So I'm quite excited about this because we, Trish and I caught up. Trish is one of my favorite people. Trish has been my coach for 5 years.
Yeah.
I want to say about 5 years.
Been a long time, yeah.
And a lot of insight and wisdom to our work together. And we talk a lot about some of the big topics and important, well, what we see as important topics that are also been kind of weaving through the conversations we've had so far on Kainos. And we caught up earlier. I would just try to tune into what is really alive. Trish has been working on a platform of really bringing kind of into practice what does really next level community look like, where we're really stepping into co-creating in a really real way together. And so we were thinking, well, what's feeling really alive today is why doesn't community work very well? Intentional community. Why does it fail so often? And this is a question that bugs me a lot. And so I went on a little bit of a rant, which I will try and repeat in a slightly less ranty way, but I probably won't hold back too much. But so, it's funny because this is going to be perhaps a strange example to start with, but I know a lot of sannyasins who were with Osho. And I, did a lot of my therapy training with sannyasins. And, while I'm not a sannyasin, I have kind of connected with that world quite a bit. And, just if anyone's seen Wild Wild Country, maybe raise your hand if you saw the Netflix show Wild Wild Country. Yes, or perhaps you were there even. Who knows? There is of course, there was a lot of toxicity in that system, as well as a lot of energy and vibrancy. But what really struck me, and one of my mentors, Rafia Morgan, and Turia Hanover, they were both on the ranch, and Turia was and they were both quite fairly prominent in the community. And they managed to build like a hydroelectric dam and an international airport, basically, or an airport at least, and all this other kind of fairly hard to do, complex aspects of a very advanced kind of effective community. And so when I was brought that example up, because I was like, I cannot think of a kind of intentional community that I've seen in my lifetime that I think could build a hydroelectric dam. But I want to see what kind of community could do that again, And so part of it, I think, is, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I do think the particular form of sort of hyper-inclusivity and identity politics and sort of social justice activism that came into a lot of communities created a pretty deep inertia in some of them, brought some positives, but also created like a really deep inertia where, some senses of healthy hierarchy, a sense of getting stuff done, a sense of just getting on with it, being able to work with triggers, seem to just not be there in a lot of ways. And there may well be examples that I'm missing, but this is just at least from my observations. And that's really frustrating to me, because I think one of the things we need, and this points to something you were saying, Kalima, a moment ago, and Kimberly as well, is to come together, and to come together effectively. That's the really important thing. We can come together, but can we come together, cohere, move towards a more beautiful world, work with one another, be able to manage the complexity of that and step into something truly new and beautiful. And so Trish has been working on that for decades, right? That question. And so so maybe, Trish, the first question could be, that's a big one, why is it so hard? Why can't we just do it?
That's a great question. And it's what I've been asking for the last literally 30 years. And when I first started asking that question, I was really passionate about creating a better world. But even that, like defining what does a better world mean? Like, what is it that we are all saying yes to? I was finding that it's just nearly impossible to try to find a version that we can all align with. And it creates this paradox, because how do we actually work towards something together if we have such different views of what that thing is that we're working towards, or that vision is? So in looking at that, I would say the better world is still comes down to community and relationships. And I want to also name that, like, when I was sitting with the topic of community, we have all this love-hate kind of relationship, I find, with community. People are like, want it, but then they have oftentimes trauma. And I think we need to even redefine that. Like, we have a global community, then we have our neighborhood communities, we have our families that are our community, we have friends that are communities, we have different churches that are communities. Like, there's all these ways that we come together, and it's gotten really confused with sameness, that it has to be people like me. And I think it's really because of this paradox question of how do we create a common alignment with, and my challenge has been sameness doesn't work, because as we're seeing in the world now, and I saw this back in the late 80s even, like sameness is kind of boring. And it gets boring even when you got like-minded people. We tend to stir stuff up. But it's also, the other option is like opposition, or trying to fight for our version. And none of that's going to work and get us ultimately what we want. So I started looking at, well, what are the things that we can actually all say yes to? What are the highest common denominators that we can say yes to? And that over the years has ended up in a framework, and then that framework has now a more general approach. But there's some important shifts and changes that we have to look at in how we're approaching aligning with each other and still being able to get what we want. So it kind of comes down to, I'd say the biggest challenge to creating it is what I call the other person problem. How do you get what you want when the other person isn't in agreement to give it to you? Right? And we haven't been taught how to, we've never solved that problem as humans. Right? It's always kind of and it's my choice or your choice, and we'll make some deal. It'll be transactional. We've got both and, but still there's embedded in it often, even both and often has embedded in it sort of a keeping track, right? So how do we solve that other person problem? How do we actually help each other, not just get what we want, but understanding that we can't actually get what we desire without each other? It's actually an impossible task. So to me, that's the first step, is recognizing that we can't actually create the world we know in our bones we want, or the community that we want, without understanding that we have to help each other get what we deeply desire.
Yeah, that was really nicely described, and I want to flip it 360 by presenting your own words back to you with something you've written before, which is that it's
Yeah.
good not to get what we want as well, right? And this is
Right.
I was speaking to um, Josh Fry for Crossroads for the documentary, and he pointed out, as he's pointed this out in the Emerald before, that community for hunter-gatherers wasn't like this selected community. You didn't get to go
Right.
out like on an app and be like, I want to find people who all share my values and my perspective. If you're in a group of 40 people, maybe 15 of them you don't like that much. Maybe 5 of them are okay, but like 10 of them you're like, oh, I really didn't like those guys and those. But you have to work together, and part of human community is friction, right? And the last point on that just comes up is the sociologist Sherry Turkle, who's written a few great books on our relationship with technology. She pointed out that what a lot of the technologists were trying to build, or are trying to build, is what they call a friction-free emotional life. So you don't have to have friction, emotional friction. And she uses as an example of someone was building an app, and it was designed so that you could track where like classmates were, so you didn't have to bump into them buying coffee or something like that. So it was like an avoidance app, to reduce the friction. And that just seems to me the complete opposite of healthy community. But yeah, back to that point, Tricia, why shouldn't we get what we want as well? I think that's an interesting one.
Well, I think, if you look at, I'm even going to frame this in the extreme. If you look at what we might define as evil, the way I think of it is like, if you have your desire at all costs, you want what you want, and there's no connection with, no sense of other, if there's no, I'm part of something greater than the whole, and it's just single-minded, that sets up a whole bunch of stuff that we might collectively say is a bad idea as humans, right? Because it becomes single-minded. But the thing that struck me about that, I was actually watching the Squid Games TV show, Netflix game, because I was curious about it, and it's a rather horrifying kind of show, so it's in a lot of ways. But what really struck me, without any spoiler alerts here, hopefully, is when they asked the people behind it, the puppet masters, why, they were like, well, we're bored. And it really struck me how, if you're single-minded and there's no relationship, if you're not in relationship with the other, there's nothing that new that can happen. If you're not in relationship with life, all you have is your little bubble, and then it becomes an addiction. It becomes this is what I want, and it becomes more of an addictive pattern, rather than, oh, and I'm in relationship with you, and I have my desire, and you have your desire, and then what wants to happen from that? That's a whole different state of consciousness, actually. That's a whole different possibility. Options open up that aren't there either. Because what I'm seeing in a lot of the spiritual communities and in a lot of the impact, purpose-based communities is there's a lot of we and sameness in a way that actually drops personal individual desire down And then it can feel like schooling fish. It can feel like there's no energy for or aliveness for something. So there's a way that we've been taught we can either choose to kind of be alive and awake and in our own desire, or we have to be in coherence and turn down desire. And I'm saying that's one of the states that we need for this new territory is how do you keep your individual aliveness and keep your desire while in coherence in relationship with others. And I believe that's actually a new state. That's a different state of consciousness. And it's like being able to be in that jazz improv, but it's recognizing you're going to get what you want still, but it's going to be in an even more informed, more interesting, more creative, who knows what's possible that isn't there when we're just chasing what we think we want at that level or just the single desire. But the other piece of this is if I said to you guys right now, like, I want all of you, I want you to love me. I want to feel loved, right? There's what does that mean, right? And how do I go about that? Like, there's we've never been taught the skill of that. And if my desire is to be loved, suddenly I'm in a position of powerless. How do I get you guys to love me? How do I get you guys to feel a certain way that then sets up all sorts of manipulations, movements? That's actually not creating relationship for you to actually experience me. So we end up getting in our way and creating these strategies that we then form communities around. We find other people that have the same strategies as us, hoping that we'll get what we want. But it's really about the skills and being able to understand and untangle our desires and be able to help each other get what we want in this other place, in this other state.
Yeah, there's something about one of the things I appreciate about your work and that approach is that, I think myself and probably a lot of maybe a bunch of people on this call were quite influenced by integral studies and Ken Wilber's work. And so in integral there's this wonderful map of yes and effectively. How do you hold multiple perspectives at the same time? How do you
Right.
hold how do you move between, to some degree, move between different states, but not so much. Really what it is a map, but the map is not the territory. And it feels very different to intellectually hold two perspectives and emotionally and spiritually and in your body feel the two states you're talking, the various states you're talking about. That's something I've noticed over the last years. Like, it's a really different,
Yeah.
I would agree it's a state. And then, as the saying goes, a state turns into a trait eventually. I think it takes all of us to practice that. And I don't think it's like a instant switch. I think it's like we're all sort of ongoing to try and hold both, hold the complexity inside ourselves. But there's another thing that you mentioned that I think is important, which is like, I have found in a lot of these communities and gatherings that there's an implicit assumption, and people have said it to me, and I can be somewhat disagreeable in these situations. And so like, people have said, yeah, but we're all like moving towards the same thing. Like we're all rowing in the same direction. And I'm often like, are we? I don't know, maybe, but like, there's such a loss of deep richness of human contact to assume that, because how interesting if we're not? And then that's human. Like, that's like, oh, great. Oh, actually, you think a better world is over there. I think it's over there. Or maybe we do think it's in the same place, but we're going to row differently or row at different speeds. It feels like that's a really important place for any of these communities or conversations to start.
Yeah, and I think that's been one of the kind of guiding questions I've had is how do we frame it or hold it? There's a couple of things that come up from what you're saying. One is the there is a completely redefining of desire, and there's also a redefining of safe spaces that I think we want to bookmark too, about what does that mean to have a safe space. And I also think that one of the ways sometimes just simple metaphors can be really helpful in visualizing a different way of holding a collective vision. So one of the things that one of the images that I got when I was like, how can I visualize this possibility, this new way of this new territory, was the image of a disco ball. And if you think of a disco ball as every person has their facet of the disco ball, that's about what are you calling in? What are you bringing in? And I would define desire as life force. aliveness, you being animated by life through your unique perspective of you is going to create something unique to you. That's the movement when you're in that deep desire. So what is your facet? And then the idea of the disco ball is, instead of those versions being in opposition, how do we then align? And that's where I found the four forces is really about aligning with life, which if we each align with life, we align with each other, and those facets on the disco ball automatically align. And I want to name that it's not, I have a framework, and a lot of what I've been, a lot of the pushback I've gotten over the years is like, well, it's another framework. There's tons of frameworks, but it's true. And they're all valuable. And what I found unique about what I feel like life has been teaching me, like I'm living this and doing it through trial and error myself, is that there are these foundational elements of reality, of life, that when we align and understand those skills, it's like learning musical scales or musical principles or the palette of, primary colors. From there, it's unlimited what you can create, but there is an alignment piece of those primary colors, or that foundational piece that then allows us to have our works of art actually enhance each other rather than be in opposition of each other. And we were a little aside, like even the issue around, AI is such a big issue right now. And they talk about alignment, like how do we align artificial intelligence to human values? And I'm like, well, it's impossible because humans aren't aligned with each other. So, but if we're aligning with life, we automatically align with each other. If AI is aligned with life, then we're automatically aligned with AI. So, and I feel like, these four core foundation set of skills, they're also states of consciousness. It's kind of a map, allow us to have that primary palette, or those notes for creating. And the disco ball, I get super excited because like I want to know all the other facets. And I've realized in my own exploration of this image that my facet of that is actually wanting to help and amplify other people's facets. Like that gets me so excited because I know my facet's going to be something even more amazing than I could possibly imagine by being in relationship with all you guys. And it honestly is a very selfish reason why I've been doing this for so many years. Just as a question, like how many of you also you just have that in your bones knowing like there's a whole other possibility. I don't think anybody would be on this call if you didn't have some knowing in you of something else that is right there. It's already there, right? It's already there. We have everything. There's nothing new we need to learn about war, right? Like, but how do we harvest from that and actually create what are we bringing into the new pattern rather than just fighting against the old pattern? So one of the things you and I have talked about a lot too, Allie, is right, like there's this idea of sort of fighting against the current culture versus inviting something truly novel and new. What's the new pattern? But it's informed by what we've learned. But often we get caught in the analysis of the current pattern, and then we have to kind of turn around, face into the unknown, but feel behind us all the wisdom that we've collectively had around the current pattern. But it needs a forward facing, what are we bringing forward with us into the new pattern? What is that new pattern? Actually, would it be doing that little exercise that we thought about? What do you think, Ali, about doing that? This
Yeah,
seems
yeah,
like a
yeah. Let's
good.
do that. I also really want you to define the four forces for anyone who's going to watch this after, who's on the call, who hasn't come across those. But like, let's do that after. Let's do the exercise because I think that's
Yeah, because then we can use
nice
your
flow.
examples for. So this is just a little exercise that Ali and I thought would be fun to do. So if you were to just take a few minutes, it's a solo exercise here, but really feel into what what's something in community, something you've experienced in community that's either caused you hesitation or that's been a trauma or is something you don't like, some experience you've had about community that has informed the way you do community. Just take a minute to think about that and name it. Is there a fear? What have you seen as like a downside to community or concern? So once you've felt into that, the other side of this is if you were to say, okay, let's flip it, not just what have I learned from that, but what is it in informing and what do I want to bring forward from that experience into the new pattern? What is it that I want to say hell yes to? What is it informing about your desire that you could take from that experience and say, this is what I want to create in community or experience in community, even if you don't yet know how to do it? And that's part of the key. What is it that you're saying, ooh, if I could just get this or create this desire for community, what would that be? Whatever that past experience is informing your desire for the future. It's taking another minute. And I would even challenge what's a version of that you want to bring into the future pattern or the new pattern that's so freaking exciting that you just get like, I can't wait. Or wow, if I could get that, wow. So does anybody wanna share? What was that experience? Is it easy to find something that's challenging? Did you search for it? What was your experience of doing that little exercise of flipping it? Anybody feel like sharing?
And just go ahead and
Yeah,
unmute
Drew.
Drew.
Oh.
Hi, thanks for letting me into the meeting late. I'm glad I'm here for this little exercise. So what came up was kind of like board meetings and kind of, let's say, dark triad leadership qualities, you know, where you can't get a word in edgewise because somebody else is just like hogging the mic. I get a somatic reaction just even saying that. And so the flip side of that is something that I've thought about before. A form of decentralized decision making where the best ideas get, everybody has a chance to throw into the pot, and the best ideas get upregulated, and that's an ongoing process. And we all live happily ever after. How's that?
That's great. Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And I'm going to share a bit about the four forces after we do this too, just to kind of start to map out how it's helpful to think about the things that in possibly a new way in order to like how would you create that and what would get informed in the actual application of that. But awesome. How many people had a similar body reaction to like the dark those meetings that kind of set up? Right. Somebody recommended that my community should be set up and run by committee, and I just was like, no, 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 no. So the whole point was to find the narcissists and stop them. Yeah, that's really great. That's a really interesting point there. Anybody else like to share your experience, the exercise for you? Thank you, Drew. Just doing one more. Yeah, Kalima.
What came up for me was encountering emotional immaturity that was so stuck that everything that came forward reverted into that conversation over and over again, so that the mental body was completely shut down. Ideas were not accessible or even debatable because the emotional field was so clogged. So what came to me was some forum of skillful holding of that emotional space that was safe enough for that person to be able to relieve and release that old trauma and let go and let it wash downstream and become a past phenomenon that they could learn from, that would let the rest of us move forward, because we weren't constantly recycling their trauma in the group setting. And what emerged as a result of that was this amazing sense of relief and healing, but also the return to collaboration, which had been completely blocked at, so yeah, it was huge for me. And I don't know, I think it's probably common in communal settings.
Yeah, and I think that both of those, both yourself and Drew's example, are great illustrations of four forces strategies and patterns that show up, and how by adding in the other forces into more of this kind of superposition of this at the same time can actually open up even more possibilities of creativity. It's like going from black, white, instead of gray, from black and white to go to Technicolor, where there's still black and white and gray, but there's all these options that weren't there otherwise. And I would say, like Drew, one of the things about the four forces is I found that there's sort of two forces that are the more we focused, and there's two forces that are more I focused. And and you can sort of see in the world that I find that people tend to fall into these two camps of either I people or we people as a primary strategy, not or as a primary desire focus. So if we think of I'm sorry, start with the we spaces, connection. One of the first ones that came up when I asked, what do we all want, was we all want to love, be loved, be part, and belong, fit in. And there's also, though, a lot of tangles with each of these forces. So what I found was ultimately connection is about sensing and feeling and consciousness. It's sort of with deep connection, you just have pure awareness. There's no separate self. There's just oneness, or even beyond oneness, just pure awareness. And there's states of things in between that. But when communities tend to go into connection spaces, they end up often being in this sort of flood, what I call flood planing, where it's sort of like the energy drops, but it's like, oh, we're in union. But then at some point there's like nothing getting sparked, and then somebody acts out or something gets triggered. And there's a lot of focus on those communities also about safe spaces being not getting triggered, or instead, what I would name is when you add the other forces in, and I'm going to talk about the other forces. What I would say, Kalima, is what you're pointing to, and what Ali and I have talked a lot about, is how do you actually process conflict and triggers as you go, so that you have the skills where you're like, oh, something's coming up, it's informing something, and you start to have, like, in my marriage, my husband had zero skills when I met him. He called himself a caveman. But there was this modeling and just saying, hey, we have a very small tolerance for being off, but it's not processing all the time because we're doing it in real time. So it doesn't have to bottle up or catch up, and it's really like, hey, we need to get through this to the other side. I really feel like that's what you're naming too, Kalima, right? Like, what is it on the other side that we get to do something new instead of doing the same thing over and over again? But safe spaces to me are causing stagnation. They're not giving you nervous system resilience in the way I want to. I want to approach it as whatever happens, we can handle it. We're in this together. Whatever comes up, we got it. It's okay. And what happens from that, right? The other side of the sort of the we forces is purpose, which is, this is why they tend to go together, which is, what are the structures, the rules, the meaning making? It's the individual parts coming together to create something greater, but it often has a coherence. We need people to be in coherence with each other. We need to have the same values. So purpose as a common desire would be, we want to contribute, we want to feel part of something greater, we want to have impact and meaning. But when that becomes and it gets tangled up in this axis of the we spaces, it can end up feeling like it's all like we have to be in coherence, otherwise, we're in trouble, right? It has to, and we have to use regulation and rules and structure to make sure everybody's on the same page. Rather than, what if we had structures that were about emergence? What is the structure? What are the banks to the river that give direction to life force? And that's the third force, would be life force, the animation. the aliveness, the movement. So too much purpose, we end up in stagnation and sort of stuckness of, and too much aliveness without the banks to the river is chaos and there's no order. But when you put them together, now you have a container that actually is about coherence that has movement to it and has individuality and expression in it as well. And that's the fourth, is the expression. So life force and expression are the I, the more I emphasis, because as you feel more aliveness, you feel yourself more. And as you feel yourself more, it's very easy to have connection and purpose want to drop away because you're feeling yourself and you're alive. And that's what causes greed. And what I would say, Drew, is that dark triad, right? That dark, the personality disorders of narcissism, and or even, even just, how many of you have been with somebody who just downloads and just talks your ear off, and then afterwards is like, oh my God, I feel so connected to you. And you're like, all you did was just talk at me for the last hour, right? But we're so tangled about that. Like, no, expression is about, where are you looking for? It is about self, but self is multifaceted. Self is changeable also. It's about perspective, including being able to shift to somebody else's perspective. So there's a whole set of skills. I'm going through this very quickly, but I'm hoping to at least give a flavor for, like, when you have that sort of, that leader, that's I know what needs to happen, or even cult leaders. Let's look at, why do connection people end up with narcissistic cult leaders often? It's because that cult leader is holding the expression dominance in a way that's trying to compensate for the sameness of the connection, but it ends up causing this very, very destructive polarity. Rather than, how do we all be in our unique perspective and in our uniqueness and in our aliveness, while holding coherence, while using our senses to feel and experience each other. Is this making sense? I know it's a lot I'm throwing at you, but Drew, I see your example as that expression dominant space, right? Where it's not about other people, it's not about the jazz improv, it's about one person talking at people. But those people are also often rewarded in our current capitalistic version of things, right? The psychopathic tendencies get rewarded in our current Western expression dominant cultures. But if you also look at more of the connection dominant, say, of China, or where sameness and where it's about lessening individuality, that's not ideal either. So this is where, what's the both and when we put these together?
Yeah.
So yeah.
There's just so much coming up for me. I thought that was really nicely laid out. I really like, linking the forces to different strategies, and then also I find it really useful for linking them to different peak mystical experiences.
Right.
I wrote an article a while ago where I did that. I used the four forces model in that article a few times to look at, like, our confusion around mystical experience, because we, especially in the psychedelic world, but I think more broadly, because of the impact of Eastern religions coming into the West in the 60s and 70s, many of us automatically associated spiritual experience with connection, a kind of deep oneness, right, merging, disappearing. My ego died. I became one with everything. It's like that famous joke. What does the Dalai Lama order in a pizza parlor? One with everything. So it's just like that. That's our like kind of baseline. Yeah, that's what a mystical experience is. But of course, there's there's many different types, and there's a purpose mystical experience is what all of Western culture is based on, which is prophetic mystical experience, which is like Moses talking to the burning bush, and the burning bush is like, I've got a mission for you that's rooted in history and has a beginning and an end point that you're stretching for. Radically different to what the Buddha experienced in a kind of letting go, merging, connection experience. And then that growth being the kind of Kundalini awakening, which of course people might have seen. People will have Kundalini awakenings in yogic practices or breath work, and very often they, as you were just pointing out, Trish, they flood. It's like too much life force energy, and it's like they kind of like blow themselves open, and they can go manic, and so they're just not, I guess, purpose bounds to the river. So I find that, like, I find it such a useful model for looking at states. And then the other thing that came up for me that I'm noticing as a theme, that's certainly true for me as well when I did the exercise, is the shadow, is the dark side, is how we actually process, own, look at, work with the shadow. And it's absolutely critical. And the best communities I've ever been in are like a, path of love, which is like a deep therapeutic process, because it's so based on honesty and the shadow. And when everyone's honest with each other in a space, and particularly in a kind of a contained environment, then very quickly judgment drops away because we're all in the same boat. And we're all like, oh yeah, that awful, awful thing I just shared that I thought once I shared it, no one ever talked to me again and I would be a complete pariah and have to live in a mountain. No one ran away. And then actually the person who shared after me, they were just as honest and I didn't run away. I actually felt closer to them. That's such a powerful, important experience. It's so different from trying to like, let's not get triggered. Let's stay in the parasympathetic mode, never get into sympathetic. And, that's, I think it's very, for me, that's genuine inclusivity when it's like people can really show up as who they are. And that's actually what I got to in my yearning. And I think where my trigger has been with like the social justice movements, which claim inclusivity and then actually block out pretty much anyone who doesn't agree with their version of inclusivity. I think, it's one of I haven't fully connected with why I've been so triggered by that for so long, but I think it comes from a deep desire for real inclusivity because I know what it looks like and I felt it and I felt like the connection, the love in that. So it's like, I'm sad when it's fake. It's really sad, but it's kind of the most important thing. So yeah, it's just a powerful exercise. So thanks.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that. And it's also bringing up one of the things that you've inspired me to name, to use this name, which is part of what we need is edgy spaces. Like we talk about being at the edges, but then there's edgy spaces. And I think there's a confusion also with doing shadow work a lot of time that's like more like, oh, this is group therapy, so people avoid it or they don't want to share. But edgy is like, there's a whole other possibility around process and around we're doing this kind of work together informs everybody in the group. It informs the group field. It's way more than doing personal growth. And it's like you can't actually get at the stuff that wants to inform the future, I think, doing it by yourself or even you need real life context and you need edgy spaces for your nervous system to have a different experience. Oh, I can do this. And what's on the other side is part of the edgy experience. It's not just, oh, we're all talking about our trauma and bonding over that. It's like, now what are we going to do if we step out of that? And how do we challenge each other to be in the new pattern, not to feel comfortable in the old pattern and we've shared it? And for me, that's a lot of the places that I've felt not seen and heard is because there's a feeling that there's a lot of circuit breakers around big energy, and I love the ecstatic. A lot of the four forces was also informed by my having these a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, and a lot of it happened in my bed with Eros and sexuality. Like I love Eros informed spaces. That's edgy, right? But without Eros, there's not an aliveness. Or what would happen? What could we create if we're flirting with life and bringing flirting into our projects and our creativity? Right. But those are things like, nope, can't do that. Nope, can't do that. Our culture is getting more and more shut down. And all it's doing is shutting our nervous systems down. But those ecstatic states also, I believe, it's not just ecstatic. You can call them peak, you can call it whatever. But when have that range, what we're really wanting are those feelings. It's not really about the things. It's about how we want to feel. And then what do we create from there? So one of I've over the years struggled really hard, like to the point of being in tears when somebody asks me, Trish, what do you do? And just recently, like literally 3 weeks ago, I was like, oh, I support and help individuals and organizations. I do both, but it's about living and creating and collaborating from these new and expanded states of consciousness, not just accessing them or chasing them, but what do we do from these? And there is so much more variety, like you were sharing, Ali, when you look at it, there's so many different combinations and ways that we can experience each other and the world around us when we understand some of the levers to that, the ways like the soundboard. And those bigger spaces also inform what's possible in a way. Like it's why psychedelics have become so mainstream too, is when you're in those more altered states or more possibilities, like you don't even have to take the medicines, but the medicines are anchoring us into the possibility of these states. It's giving us access. But then how do we actually live from those, not just keep doing the medicines? What is it informing is what I get super excited about. And that's what the Four Forces for me has been a journey about. How do I make sense of these experiences I'm having that everybody else, it's been a very interesting journey having these sort of spontaneous things. And I mean, to the point where people were getting amnesia at times, having the experiences with me and then thinking I'm crazy. Like, it's just been a journey of figuring out why is this happening and why me? But understanding and mapping that, life becomes so much more fun. And so much more deep pleasure, even in I love to do process work in person with people. And even when we're in that shadow or in that deep work, there's a pleasure in it that I feel like we have shame around the pleasure of being in that deeper space with each other. But, of course I don't want somebody to be feeling pain, but I'd rather be in that space with them than be pretending that it's not there and not knowing the person. And that pain always informs something. It's important. Like there's a reason why it's there. So I get very excited about that deeper work because it's just so. I just feel like it's what we're here to do.
That was beautiful. Yeah, I think everyone else is feeling excited as well because because your passion is coming through. And yeah, it strikes me that, when you mentioned this sense of like when pain is coming up in the field, I have this like really strange mix of feelings, often as a facilitator or just, in relationship with friends, but often as a facilitator because you're creating an environment where that feels safe to kind of really come up. And I have this giddy mix of like, oh no, the order is being disrupted and I must hold the space.
Right.
And yes, amazing, it's real. But I think, the feeling is that it's real and authentic and that it feels more human and alive. Like there's something of that. And then also, I think what I'm just, we have Breaking Convention, the psychedelic conference I co-organize is coming up in a few months. And I've been thinking like, what do I want to talk about? Because I haven't taken many psychedelics recently, and I'm kind of like very much in a kind of different practices and doing a lot of breath work. And Ram Dass famously said, once you get the message, hang up the phone. And then also in my book, I talk a lot about the cognitive science of you do something in one domain and then you practice it, and then you bring it into other areas, and that's actually where the benefit is. And the one message the key message that I think psychedelics have taught me is to go into pain rather than avoiding it, because as I think it's Max Wolf, there's a psychedelic researcher who put a theory out a couple of years ago, is like that one of the things psychedelics do is that they make it more painful to avoid your pain than to look at it. And normally you can do the opposite. You can get away with the opposite. You could argue that eventually that will catch up with you, but you can kind of get away with it. You can distract yourself, you can avoid, you can tell a fantasy, tell yourself a story that's bullshit, whatever. When you take a psychedelic, it's the truth. And that for me, when I tune into that, I think, well, I can try to do that day to day. Now, I'm quite avoidant, so it's difficult, but the mission remains, I think, a noble one to be like, yeah, okay, I know. Like, what would a mushroom say right now to me? It would be like, you don't want to look at that because it's embarrassing. Look at it right now. I'd be like, okay, I guess I'll have to. And I think that's like, back to our question of community, and I do want to open up to the community in a moment so we can get some, I've just seen the time as we've been immersed. But yeah, I think that for me is a really important aspect of community, that there's a moving into pain, not in a sort of obsessive way, but in a way that's like, when it's there, amazing. This is great information. Let's work with it and not be afraid of it. Any thing you want to add before we open up to any thoughts, questions, Trish?
I think one of the foundational elements of sort of the process work sphere of working with what comes up in a group. For example, Arnold Mindell was a psychotherapist who talked about process work as a form of psychotherapy. But those skills are very much what I see everybody needs to be able to be in the process of it as we go. And there's something like when you're naming, right? Like as a facilitator, I feel mixed because I've got my purpose and my structure, right? And now there's this thing that's over here. But from a process frame about this, there's a trusting and a leaning in that whatever that is that's showing up is actually in service of the purpose of the group. And that part is often missed. It's seen as more of an aside or something that's sort of just derailing and we want to get, but instead of like, why is that showing up right now in this moment in this group? And holding the purpose of the group, holding why it's showing up, not letting it go off, but saying, why now? Why right here? And, there's one, when I was doing some training around process work, I call it, now I have my own version, which is called edges work. But they would talk about the disturber, that no matter how, I remember I did a weekend on connection and nobody was doing anything. Everybody was just like sitting in beingness, which is a great connection skill, but when you want process and movement. And finally, one of my, even my people that had been to many retreats of mine were just in this like Zen sort of like, no, I'm just in being, until finally one of them lost their shit and just started like, I can't take it anymore. And she was like, but it like broke open the space that then allowed other people to kind of get out of that hypnotic we space in a way that something new was to emerge. So embracing that disturber is showing up for a reason. Everything is showing up for a reason, but in service of what the intention is. And that's where, as facilitators and as leaders, as even meeting holders, there's a skill to holding the intention of the space and having the space be a collaborator with you. The space is your collaborator, as well as everybody else in. So I'll leave it there and we can open up to questions, but I get very excited about this kind of work.
Awesome. I think the space as your collaborator would make a good t-shirt as well. Maybe we get some of those, some Kainos
yeah, your
t-shirts.
Space is your collaborator, yeah.
It's a lovely, I think absolutely true. So yeah, let's open up for, in the last 15 minutes or so, any thoughts, questions, reflections, everything is welcome. And just unmute and speak when you feel called to. It's easier.
So I just have a general question. I think a lot of the challenge that I have, I think, are magnified because I live in a really small town. So it's hard to find lovely people like this to converse with. So I'm wondering if you have, this might be totally like way too far off topic, but any ideas around infrastructure? Like what can we do to actually help facilitate connecting with other people? There just seems to be so many things in the way. Like, so here we are connecting, but I'm alone, I'm in a room, everyone else is likely a similar sort of thing. So, it's a degree of connection, but what I'm really needing is actual connection. So I'm just wondering if you had any ideas around that.
Allie, did you want to start? Should I start? Okay. So one of the tangles about connection is that we have to create it, or that it's something that we need people like us to feel. And I would do the experiment of reframing connection as allowing yourself to be impacted by people around you. And what is it to really feel the other person? So what I found was some of the reason why I would have strangers walk in, more than once I had a stranger walk in, like in a bar, have a strange man come up to me and ask for a hug and then burst into tears in my arms. I've had people crawl up into my lap. I'm sitting on a park bench and a woman crawl up into my lap and burst into tears. You might be thinking, well, why the heck would I want that? But there was something there, right? But for me, I always felt very honored and just like, yeah, like this is what's real in this moment. So it's amazing what happens when you reframe connection as experiencing what's already there. And when you show up in a space with people and you really allow yourself to feel the people in the room, they respond. Something changes. Now, the lonely part that I found is where we need each other for this is not everybody there necessarily has the skills to feel me back, right? Or to understand. But you change the space by you being willing to be that tuning fork. Now, one of the things that comes up is if you're an empath, you're like, I go into a room, I feel everybody. And then I get overwhelmed, right? So we tend to then go into lone wolf and put up a wall. So one of the both and skills is how do you hold your individuality while feeling others? expression, connection at the same time. And when you do that, you're also feeling the other person's uniqueness. You're not merged in like, oh, I'm feeling connection. We often merge in with the other person, but then we can't actually feel the uniqueness of the other person. So connection, being able to really feel the people around you and see what happens. It's amazing how quickly people respond to that and the space opens up and changes. Does that make sense, Drew? As a possible experiment?
Yes, a little bit. My initial reaction is, how do I do that without taking on kind of a leadership role? Because I have an aversion.
So, right.
That's what I was going to speak to. Yeah. Because I was going to say maybe you might have to, depending where you are.
Right.
Maybe that would be an edge, because I was thinking, I got really German when you asked the question. I went immediately to fixing the engineering problem. But I think, one thing you could look at is, is there a way to make, say, a discussion group that doesn't explicitly say this is about deepening, but you use it as a leader of the discussion group, use techniques from, for example, circling or, various dialogue practices that are subtle, and they just start getting people into that deeper space. And there's, they might not have self-selected for, we want to have sort of very deep conversation, but they've self-selected for, I want to have a conversation about, a topic or whatever it might be. This would require you in that scenario, being in that leadership position. And then the other thing is, my hope is that once the Kainos community grows large enough, there'll be enough people, and same with Trish's community that we're planning on partnering with. So it's like that overall we'll have enough people that there might even be potentials for people to meet up, which happened a lot during Rebel Wisdom. The thing is with America is that it's so big. So it's like, I thought we could do it during Rebel Wisdom. I was like, great, okay, we have all these people. And I was like, oh, that's an incredible distance to travel. Whereas in the UK, everything, well, I'm going to offend people, but everything's sort of centered around London. It's not entirely, of course. That's unfair, but it's a smaller country, right? And, Denmark is a smaller country. It's just easier to do that, in smaller countries. But I would love if there was that possibility at some point where we could just kind of do that. And I know Trish has done a lot of that with meetup groups, for example. So, there's that option, hopefully, at some point.
Yeah, and I would say, like, in this moment, what I would be really drawn, if we had the space for it to do it, would be to dive into that question, Drew, around the leadership resistance. That to me is like, ooh, it's got light to it. And it's like, and actually embracing that and looking at what is the resistance actually opens up a new creative space of how to do connection in a different way than you've been doing it. So I would look at what's that leadership role, what's the tangle around expression or power, or like that to me is like this really interesting inquiry, which I bet would probably break open the space for everybody. Because I feel like we have these options of like, I'm either the leader and but then I'm lonely, and then who are the people like me? For me, it's like, how do you do jazz improv by yourself? It's really hard. Like, but there still is, though, a way to do that where then you're inviting people and sharing in a way that's not about being the teacher or the leader. And so, for example, I did that in my marriage with my husband. It wasn't, I'm your teacher and you need to learn this. It was like, hey, here's how I do relationship. Let's be in it. Let me show you. Let's do this. That's a very different stance than let me teach you because you don't know how to do it. And it's interesting, like, I think what you were saying, Allie, if I can, like, name this too, is we tend to go to structure or format to fix it, which is a purpose thing, right? And I know you're very strong in purpose, and a lot of people here too. So we're like, what's the format that's going to work, right? The engineer, what's the system, what's the thing that can fix it? But to me, there's more about a curiosity around power dynamic, or a curiosity around like what's underneath that resistance that feels like, ooh, there's a whole new possibility there that feels really creative. Does that resonate, Drew, as I'm saying that?
Yes, absolutely. And maybe what I can mention here, so just a little backstory, came from a big city, moved to a small town, started up a whole bunch of different things. Mm-hmm. In the end, I think I can say that each of the sort of different things that I initiated, with total leadership, exactly what you're talking about here, I think, in retrospect, they floundered mostly and failed ultimately because I didn't recognize, and this is a Sarah Ness and Jeff Crum thing, the up position and down position dynamic. I was in the up position, but I was giving away the power all the time. So there was sort of a power dynamic thing there, and I didn't understand why people reacted and why things floundered because I was giving away all the sort of the driving force, the leadership, whatever you want to call it. So maybe it's time to give it another shot.
I know this one super well, and there's a lot here that I've learned from this that is beyond the scope of this call. But I would say, like, there's a whole different stance, which is really owning, hey, this is my space I'm inviting you into. But it's also very relational in that space is also not just working for you as your collaborator, but everybody in it is contributing to it. But it's not a everybody gets a turn equal thing. It's respecting that you get to be the leader of your space and you get to hold it, but also allowing the emergence. So I was often a lightning rod for communities where I'd be in total service, and the next thing I know, I'm getting beat up by the other leaders, and I'm like, what the hell? Like, I actually had somebody say to me, Trish, why the hell would you be part of a community that treats you so badly? Like, what are you doing? Like, why do you keep going back to this community? And it was like, it's like I put a kick me sign on my back, and yet I'm a powerful being. So, but when you're clear about what you're inviting people to in a matter of fact way, it's a whole different space. So there's a lot there, but thank you. That's a really beautiful example. And you have to be willing to hold power differently, where it's like everybody that's there has something to contribute, but not in the talking stick, sharing sameness way. It's a jazz improv way. Everybody's got a unique instrument.
Maybe last thing I'll say here, something that just sort of came up as you were speaking. Drum circle analogy. So if you start the drum circle, you've got the bass drum, you know? Yeah. You're starting with the beat, but that thing, it's like a dance. It's a jazz improv. It's going different places, but sometimes it gets off the rails, right? And you got to bring it back. So maybe that's more of an approach that feels really alive.
That's great. Yeah, I can feel it in your body. Can you guys feel like there's some note there or some stance that's getting locked in with your experience of that you can now inform? So that's beautiful. Thanks. We have Nico, is it, with a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much for opening up the space for this sort of conversation. It gets me really excited, and I love intellectualizing it, but I don't think I let myself practice it on a daily basis as often as I want. And I wrote down what you were saying about allowing ourselves to be impacted by other people. And I ask myself, what is stopping me from letting myself impacted? And I think it wasn't the leadership issue that Drew was bringing up for me. It was rather not being in control of how I'm being perceived, or a preoccupation with what's going on with me or how the other person is seeing me. So then what is the solution? I don't want to use this word, but being honest that I'm going for this, like being open that, hey, I'm feeling really stressed right now, but I'm sharing with you, and maybe that allows your energy to flow into the other person, and you're able to afterwards actually hear the person next to you instead of being in your own head and worried about your own self-perception. But then there's the risk of being misunderstood. Right. What if I share that this is how I'm feeling, and then, I'm not that image anymore, So
yeah, I get it.
Yeah. So for me, the practice is learning to be with that feeling of misunderstoodness or rejection, and just learning that, I don't know, that that's part of the human experience, and that just getting comfortable with that.
Yeah, That's beautiful example. Thank you for sharing it. And I see that as a tangle around expression and connection, actually, where there's a way that when we're worried about how the other person's going to experience us, we are in a form of manipulation. And that's kind of a harsh word, but we're wanting to get a certain reaction from somebody that then doesn't give them permission to actually have their reaction and be who they are. But it also means that we never give our nervous system the chance to really feel seen and heard, because there's always this feeling of, if I really showed up, what would happen, versus like, we don't know until we give the person a chance to actually respond. So we don't actually even trust the space that we're creating, because well, if they really saw who I was, then they wouldn't want that. Where there's always a game in some level. But you're right. Like, I had somebody say to me years ago, like, it's none of your business what other people think of you. And there's still a twist, especially with marketing for me. Ellie and I have talked about this a lot. It's really hard to do marketing without getting caught up in how do I get people? It's so manipulative, and it's in the way that it's often done. So instead, it's like, what am I inviting people into? I just keep coming back to, what am I inviting people into? Then they get to have their reactions to that. They get to decide. And then it can be in real relationship.
I totally agree that that's manipulation. And I think it can be so subtle. Like, have you ever laughed to a joke that you didn't find funny just because, I don't know, your boss said the joke, or, like it's such small things that we want to be in control of. So
it's also giving ourselves permission to get to know the many facets of each of us, that to not be in the, like, now I know you because I've seen that thing. No, you don't know. We're rich. We have so many different facets to us. Like, to be in the constant curiosity of, who are you? And now what are you sharing? Like, that in itself is fun and a whole different way of engaging. There was somebody else that had a hand up? Are we needing to wrap up now, Allie?
No, we're okay. We can go a little bit over. If people, of course, if you need to leave, there'll be the recording. And also, to mention, if you share something in one of these sessions, especially when we have more, the deeper sessions that are more wisdom focused, if afterwards you're like, nah, I don't want that to be in the film, please let me know. Please write to us. We'll just cut it out. But try and do it within like 24 hours if you can, because if we don't hear from you for a while, we'll assume not. Trish, thank you so much for coming on and being here and sharing your wisdom.
Yes, thank you, everybody. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, and it's let's do our traditional goodbye, which if you don't know what that is, it's very simply unmuting and saying thank you to our guest, Trish, and saying goodbye to each other. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
You guys are
Wonderful.
great.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Guys, no. Sweet.